What if taking a simple job offer could cost you your soul? Emily never expected that a short-term caretaking job at an isolated farm would spiral into a living nightmare. Bound by strange rules, haunted by inhuman whispers, and stalked by twisted creatures, she uncovers a horrifying truth. The Gerson farm feeds on those who enter and demands a price that never stops growing. This is a story of survival, sacrifice, and an ancient curse that refuses to die. Welcome to The Last Trade. They handed me the envelope right before I stepped onto the dirt path that led to Gerson Farm. The paper was yellowed, edges curled slightly, like it had been sitting in someone's drawer for far too long. On the front, written in bold, blocky letters, it simply read, "Rules." I ran my thumb along the sealed flap, hesitating for a moment. The wind cut sharp through the pines surrounding the farmland, whispering faint sounds that made my skin bristle. This was supposed to be a fresh start. Vermont was far enough from my past, and this quiet job, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, promised both solitude and decent pay. $2,000 for 2 weeks of farm sitting. The owners, the Gerson family, were supposedly vacationing in Europe. The air smelled of hay, moist earth, and something older that I couldn't quite place. A faint, metallic tang lingering under the sweet summer breeze. I unlocked the front door, the key clicking louder than expected, breaking the eerie quiet around me. The house itself was old, 2 stories, whitewashed with paint peeling off the wooden siding like scabs. Inside, the floorboards creaked under my boots, complaining with each step. Dust particles danced in narrow beams of afternoon light streaming through half-drawn curtains. I set my duffel bag on the kitchen counter, exhaling deeply. That's when I finally opened the envelope. Inside, a thick packet of papers greeted me, titled Caretaker Guidelines Gerson Property. My eyes scanned the list, brow furrowing more with each line. Feed the goats and chickens precisely at 6:00 a.m. Trim the raspberry bushes weekly. Wear thick gloves. If any sunflower faces in a direction different from the others, leave the field immediately and do not return until the next day. Do not investigate any noises after sundown. Never enter the cornfield regardless of what you hear from within. Do not be alarmed if goats wake up at odd hours. They are nocturnal. You may eat any fruit or vegetable except for the apples in the northwest corner. If you see any scarecrows, return to the house immediately. Lock all doors. Restock the roadside stand twice daily. Refrigerate any unsold goods. We do not keep pigs. At the bottom, neatly signed in looping cursive, the Gerson family. Something in my chest tightened. This was excessive. I walked to the window and glanced out toward the fields. Acres of sunflowers stretched far and wide, swaying gently under the golden hour sun. They looked beautiful, almost hypnotic, as their broad faces followed the dying light. The cornfield sat farther beyond, its tall stalks casting jagged shadows like long-reaching fingers. I tried shaking off the creeping unease. Farmers were superstitious, I told myself. Small towns had their quirks. Rules were just rules. The sun was dipping low, so I figured it best to take care of the livestock first, as instructed. The goats gathered as I approached the pen, their rectangular pupils narrowing, heads tilting in unison as if they were studying me. Their gazes held something unsettling, too focused, too deliberate. I poured feed into the trough, avoiding eye contact as best I could. One goat, black with a white patch on its forehead, pressed its small face against the fence and bleated. The sound cut sharp, thin and human-like, making my skin crawl. The chickens were more cooperative, if a bit skittish. They darted back and forth at my feet, clucking nervously, before descending upon the scattered feed. The setting sun cast long, thin shadows that crawled along the yard, merging with the darkening earth. My nerves prickled again. I turned toward the house. That's when I saw it. Across the field, near the edge of the sunflower rows, stood one bloom that didn't quite match the rest. While every other sunflower faced westward, toward the setting sun, this one, it faced me. Its black center stared like an unblinking eye, its petals unmoving despite the breeze that made its neighbors dance. gently. The longer I looked, the more I felt that nauseating pull in my gut. The rules echoed in my mind. If any sunflower faces differently, leave the field immediately. I wasn't even in the field, but my pulse quickened nonetheless. I backed away, hastily locking the chicken coop behind me, my hands trembling slightly. My heart pounded as I half-jogged across the grass toward the safety of the farmhouse, eyes darting back to that single defiant sunflower inside. I slammed the door, bolting it with more force than necessary. The house suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, as though I'd shut something in with me instead of keeping it out. The stove creaked softly in the kitchen. I lit the burner and prepared a quick meal of boxed pasta, more for distraction than hunger. The house was old enough that every gust of wind seemed to provoke some loose board or aging pipe to moan softly. The floor creaked as though someone was pacing upstairs. But I knew better. No one else was here. At least that's what I tried to believe. Night fell fast out here. The surrounding fields disappeared into an endless black canvas, broken only by the occasional glint of moonlight reflecting off distant leaves. As I prepared for bed, I locked the windows and drew the heavy curtains shut. Still, sleep evaded me. Somewhere after 3:00 a.m., I startled awake, my pillow damp with sweat, my neck stiff from tossing. My phone buzzed faintly on the nightstand. 3:12 a.m. I sighed, rolling onto my back and closing my eyes again. That's when I heard it. A thin, high-pitched voice, faint, almost childlike, pierced the stillness from outside. "Help me!" My eyes shot open. Frozen, I strained my ears. The sound came again, barely above a whisper, carried by the cool night air. "Please, help me!" The voice came from the direction of the cornfield. I held my breath, straining to listen again. The voice was still there. Soft, desperate, trembling under the weight of the night air. "Help me. Please." The words came in broken whimpers, drifting from the direction of the cornfield. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, as though invisible fingers were tracing my vertebrae. The sound wasn't distorted like wind or a trick of the ears. It was too clear, too human. I stumbled toward the window, cautiously pulling the curtain back just an inch. The moonlight spilled across the fields, rendering everything into shades of pale silver and black. The cornfield loomed far in the distance, its tall stalks forming jagged silhouettes against the sky. But I saw nothing else. No movement, no figure, just endless, swaying corn. "Please," I flinched backward, instinctively clutching the edge of the nightstand as my heart hammered inside my chest. "The rules? Damn the rules," echoed again inside my head. "Never enter the cornfield, regardless of what you hear from within." But what if it's real? I whispered to no one. The rational part of my brain screamed, "It's bait. It has to be bait." But something deep inside me twisted with guilt at the thought of ignoring a child's cry for help. I hesitated at the bedroom door for a full minute before rushing downstairs. My mind was a cyclone of conflicting urges. I unlocked the front door, but didn't step outside, not yet. My eyes darted around, scanning the porch, the distant tree line, the edge of the fields. "Stay right there," I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm calling someone." There was no reply, just the faint, almost rhythmic rustle of the corn. "Please? Hurry?" The hairs on my arms stood on end. It wasn't just the words anymore. The pitch had shifted, warbled, like a broken tape recorder repeating its message. There was something wrong with the way it mimicked desperation, something mechanical, unnatural. I slammed the door shut again, locked it, and pressed my back against it as if that would keep whatever was out there away. My breaths came in short, panicked bursts. The farmhouse suddenly felt like a fragile box of kindling in the middle of an endless, hostile ocean. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered after the first ring. "Elder Hollow County Dispatch. What's your emergency?" "There's someone in the cornfield," I gasped, voice shaky. I think it's a child." They're crying for help." There was a pause, a beat too long to be comforting. "No missing children have been reported, ma'am," the voice finally responded, cool and detached. "Are you sure it wasn't an animal? Coyote pups can sometimes sound like—" "It wasn't a damn animal," I snapped, my voice breaking into a sob. "It's a child." The dispatcher sighed, almost like he'd heard this before. "We'll send an officer to check the perimeter, ma'am. Please stay inside your residence until further notice." The line went dead. I stayed glued to the door for what felt like hours. Occasionally, I would hear faint whispers return, always from the same direction, always laced with that unnatural cadence. "Please, please." When the knock finally came, I nearly screamed. 3 steady knocks, soft, measured, from outside the front door. I froze, my blood running cold. Another knock, then silence. I forced my paralyzed legs to move, crawling slowly toward the small peephole on the door, my eye pressed to the lens, peering into the silver darkness. No one. Nothing but empty porch illuminated by pale moonlight. Yet the knocks had been real. Another knock. This time it came from the back door. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body locked up as though my muscles refused to obey. The knock came again, slightly louder, more urgent. I tiptoed across the house, my heartbeat thudding so violently I was certain whatever waited outside could hear it. As I peeked through the side window, I glimpsed something that nearly made me collapse. Standing at the edge of the sunflowers was a figure, or at least what should have been a figure. It was too still, too rigid, arms outstretched unnaturally to its sides. The head drooped forward like it was too heavy for the neck to support. In the pale moonlight, I recognized it, not as a man, but a scarecrow. Only, there weren't supposed to be scarecrows. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. "If you see any scarecrows, return to the house immediately. Lock all doors." I had followed the rules. I was inside. The doors were locked, the curtains drawn. But still, it stood there, watching. Or at least, I felt it watching. Hours passed, or minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. My legs gave out eventually, and I sat curled up on the hardwood floor, shivering. The house moaned around me as the wind outside picked up, and the whispering voice gradually faded into the distance. When dawn finally cracked across the horizon, bleeding amber light into the farmhouse windows, I forced myself to stand. My body trembled with exhaustion as I approached the front door and unbolted it slowly. The cool morning air hit me like a wall. Everything looked normal. The scarecrow was gone, the porch was empty, the fields shimmered gently under the rising sun like nothing had ever happened, and for a brief moment, I almost convinced myself it was all some twisted, sleep-deprived hallucination. That was until I stepped off the porch and noticed something faintly glistening in the grass. Thin droplets of moisture, gleaming crimson under the morning light. Blood. Tiny specks, forming a trail that led directly toward the cornfield. The morning air hadn't washed away the unease that clung to me like damp clothes. Even as the sun climbed higher, spilling warm gold over the fields, my stomach churned. Every time I glanced toward the cornfield, my heart seized up. The trail of blood was gone, evaporated, like it had never existed. I wanted to call the police again, but something about their previous indifference left a bitter taste. No missing child, no investigation, no questions. Instead, I focused on the rules. Stick to the rules, Emily. That's all I had. The only thread tethering me to sanity in this place. By mid-morning, I forced myself to gather the fresh produce for the roadside stand. A duty I couldn't neglect. It was part of the contract. And maybe, just maybe, clinging to these small responsibilities would keep me grounded. I loaded the wooden crates onto the small cart and pushed it down the gravel path toward the little stand at the property's edge. The stand itself was quaint. A simple wooden structure with a slanted roof, faded signs advertising fresh eggs, squash, and berries. A cash box sat on the table alongside a chalkboard with pre-written prices. As I approached, I saw him. A tall man stood silently by the stand, hands clasped behind his back. He was thin, almost lanky, with skin pale beneath the harsh summer light. His jet black suit looked painfully out of place, buttoned up despite the heat. A bowler hat perched atop his head, casting a sharp shadow over his sunken eyes. He didn't turn as I approached. Didn't move. Just stood there as if waiting. My breath hitched. Something about him sent alarms blaring in my head. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and walk away, but my legs carried me forward anyway, like they belonged to someone else. "Morning," I forced out, my voice higher than I intended. The man finally turned his head slowly, like a marionette under hesitant hands. His lips stretched into a tight smile, revealing teeth yellowed and crooked like broken piano keys. "Morning, Ms. Hargrove." I froze. I hadn't told him my name. He said it so casually, like we were old acquaintances meeting for coffee. My throat dried instantly. "Do I know you?" I asked, struggling to steady my voice. He chuckled, a soft, hollow sound that felt like dead leaves scraping against asphalt. "In a way." He paused, studying me. "The Gersons. They didn't tell me they'd hired someone new. They're usually so careful." I swallowed hard. My mouth tried forming words, but nothing coherent came out. "You know the Gerson family," I finally managed. "Quite intimately," he said, voice lowering. "We've done business over the years." His eyes gleamed, sharp as razors under the brim of his hat. "And they never mentioned they'd be away?" The air between us thickened. My fingers itched to reach for my phone, but my arms stayed pinned to my sides. "Well," I stammered, "they're on vacation for a few weeks." "Vacation," he repeated, tasting the word. "Of course." He made no move to browse the produce or even glance at it. He was only here for me. I tried shifting the conversation. "If you'd like to buy something, the prices are on the board. You can help yourself." He smiled again, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Oh no, I'm not here for the vegetables, Miss Hargrove." The way he said my name again made my stomach flip. A bead of sweat traced down my spine despite the breeze. I glanced up the path toward the house, silently calculating how quickly I could run back. He seemed to read my mind. "If I were you," he said softly, "I wouldn't place so much trust in the Gersons. They're not exactly who they pretend to be." The warning hung heavy in the air. I opened my mouth, but he cut me off before a word escaped. "Just be careful," he whispered. "Not everyone walks away from this place." And then, as if dismissing me entirely, he turned and strolled down the dusty road, disappearing behind a bend in the trees. I stood frozen for a full minute before my legs allowed me to breathe again. My hands trembled as I gathered the rest of the produce onto the stand. How did he know my name? How did he know I was here at all? The encounter replayed in my head over and over as I pushed the empty cart back toward the farmhouse. The world around me felt subtly wrong, like the sky was stretched too thin, the sun too bright, the birds too quiet. When I reached the porch, I noticed something new. The small security camera mounted above the front door. It had been rotated. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. It now pointed directly toward the ground instead of the yard. Someone had tampered with it. I stepped inside quickly, locking the door behind me. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. My paranoia ballooned into a suffocating cloud, filling every corner of the house. I called Derek. The line rang twice before his voice answered, sounding groggy and warm. "Hey, Em." His voice nearly broke me. I didn't realize how desperate I was to hear someone familiar. "Hey," I whispered, trying not to let my voice shake. I just needed to hear your voice." He instantly shifted into concern. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I hesitated. "There's this guy at the stand. He knew my name, knew I was here, but I've never seen him before." Silence on the other end, then, "Did you call the cops?" "No," I admitted. "Not yet. They already think I'm losing it." Another pause. "Do you want me to come up there?" God, yes. But instead, I lied. "I think I'm okay. Just shook me up a bit. "Emily, I'll call if anything else happens. I promise," he sighed. "All right, but you better." I hung up and let the phone slip from my fingers onto the couch. The house was too quiet again. Suddenly, from the back of the room, a soft knock echoed. 1, 2, 3. Not from the front door this time, but from inside the house. The knock repeated. 3 soft taps. Precise, methodical. I froze, muscles locking as though my own body refused to move. The sound hadn't come from the doors, but from deeper inside the house, somewhere upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, ears straining for the slightest shuffle, the faintest breath. The old wooden beams creaked and groaned under the weight of silence. My heart pounded so loud it became its own terrible soundtrack. I reached for the small flashlight resting on the side table and flicked it on, its weak beam slicing through the thick shadows of the living room. Slowly I ascended the staircase. The creaking beneath each step sounded like brittle bones snapping beneath my feet. My pulse quickened with each inch closer to the second-floor landing. The air grew colder somehow, like the house itself was holding its breath along with me. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. The guest bedroom door stood ajar. I hadn't opened that door. The knock came again, softer this time, as though whoever or whatever was making it knew I was listening now. 1, 2, 3. The sound came from inside the guest room. I hesitated, clutching the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. The weight of the house's silence pressed against me, thick and unnatural. My breathing shallowed as I nudged the door open with my foot. The beam of light swept across the room, empty, nothing out of place. The bed neatly made, the dresser untouched, the old armoire still sealed shut. I stepped inside cautiously, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The knock sounded again, louder. I spun, flashlight trembling in my grip, and aimed it at the armoire. The knocks had come from inside. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Every rule, every instinct, every shred of reason screaming not to open it. But my hand moved anyway. The old metal handle was ice cold under my fingertips. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and yanked the door open. Empty. Just darkness. Dust swirling in the flashlight's beam like tiny floating spirits. I exhaled shakily, stepping back, my nerves frayed to their final threads. Then I noticed it. At the very back of the armoire, almost invisible, was a small hole, maybe the size of a quarter, as if something had bored a tunnel through the wooden wall leading somewhere deeper, somewhere behind the house's structure. A chill rippled down my spine. I backed out of the room, forcing the door shut behind me, locking it, and retreating down the stairs. My knees nearly buckled as my foot hit the bottom step. The house felt wrong now, as though something ancient had shifted beneath its skin. I sat on the couch, flashlight clutched tightly in my lap, trying desperately to steady my breathing. The silence felt heavier than the creaks and knocks, more deliberate. The house was waiting. I needed to call Derek again. His voice was the only tether I had to reality. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. 2 rings and then his familiar voice filled my ear. "Hey babe, you okay?" "Derek?" My voice cracked. It happened again, inside the house this time. "What? Where exactly?" "Upstairs. There was knocking." "From inside the armoire?" A pause. "Did you open it?" I didn't want to answer. Saying it aloud made it feel more real. "Yes." His voice lowered. "Em, you need to get out of there. Tonight." I don't know if I can." I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to suppress the growing dizziness. "I'm scared to even move." "Then I'm coming up there," Derek said firmly. "Right now." A tear slipped down my cheek. "Please." "I'll leave in 10 minutes. Stay downstairs. Stay where it's lit. And don't open any more doors." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay." We ended the call, but the empty silence that followed was worse. The hours dragged as I sat stiffly on the couch, eyes darting from window to window. From the locked front door to the staircase, I refused to turn off any lights. Every lamp in the living room glowed like fragile beacons in the suffocating dark. The wind howled outside, making the old wooden siding groan. And then, faintly, the knocking returned. Not upstairs this time, not at the doors, but from inside the walls. The pattern was the same. 3 measured knocks, as if following some unspoken ritual. The sound moved from one wall to another as though circling me inside the house. 1, 2, 3. I bit down hard on my lip, forcing myself not to scream. Minutes later, headlights cut through the window, slicing through the nightmare. Derek's car rolled up the dirt path, headlights illuminating the front porch. Relief crashed into me like a wave. I rushed to the door, fumbling with the locks. When I threw it open, Derek stood there, breathless and tense. Without a word, I threw my arms around him. "You're okay," he whispered, pulling me close. "You're okay." "No, I'm not," I said into his shoulder. "Not even close." He led me back inside, locking the door behind us. "You're sure it was knocking?" he asked after we both sat, his voice cautious, measured. "Yes," I whispered. "And Derek?" I paused, forcing myself to say it. "There was someone here earlier today. A man. He knew my name." Derek's eyes narrowed. "What kind of man?" I described the tall stranger in the black suit, the pale skin, the bowler hat, the way he smiled, as if savoring every word. Derek rubbed his jaw, thinking, "You don't think this is some elaborate prank? A weird initiation by the Gersons?" I shook my head violently. "No, it's not that. It's something worse." He glanced toward the darkened windows, his expression darkening. "Then tomorrow, we leave. I'll help you pack. You're not staying another day." I nodded, fighting the tears building behind my eyes. But deep down, I wasn't sure escape was that simple anymore. As Derek dimmed the lights and we prepared to sleep downstairs on the pull-out couch, my eyes wandered toward the darkened hall, and just for a moment, I thought I saw movement, a faint shadow slipping behind the stairwell. Morning came too fast, though it offered no comfort. The sunlight that streamed through the thin curtains felt wrong, sterile, artificial, like stage lighting meant to mimic safety. Derek was already up, sipping coffee in the kitchen when I stumbled in. His eyes were heavy, dark circles forming under them. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked softly. I shook my head, sitting across from him. "Barely. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing it. Those knocks, the voice from the field." My voice cracked. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Derek." He reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're not. This place is wrong. We're packing up and leaving today, okay?" I nodded, though the knot in my stomach tightened. We went through the house together, gathering my things and stuffing them into duffel bags. Every time I glanced out the window toward the cornfield or the sunflower rows, a cold, creeping sensation crawled beneath my skin. The field swayed under the soft breeze, perfectly choreographed, except for one. Near the edge of the sunflower field, one bloom faced the wrong way again. Its black center stared directly at the house, like an eye waiting for me to look back. I quickly closed the curtains. As we loaded the car, Derek paused, frowning. Do you hear that?" I froze. He tilted his head, listening. A faint sound drifted through the still morning air, a soft grunting, rhythmic and unnatural. It wasn't coming from the cornfield this time, but from the direction of the storage shed behind the goat pens. "Is that a pig?" he asked, brow furrowing. My breath caught in my throat. "We don't have pigs," I whispered, repeating the rule as if it were a prayer. Derek glanced toward the shed. "Maybe it wandered onto the property. Some farmer nearby lost one." "No," I said quickly, panic rising. "That's not it. That's not..." The grunt echoed again, louder this time. It didn't sound quite like a pig anymore. The sound wavered slightly at the end, like someone trying to imitate an animal, but not getting it quite right. Derek straightened. "I'll check it out." "No," I grabbed his arm. "Please, Derek, don't go near it." He placed both hands on my shoulders. his tone calm but firm. "Emily, you've been through a lot, but we can't leave a wounded animal here. What if it's hurt? What if it belongs to someone?" I shook my head furiously. "I know what I heard, Derek. I know what I saw before. It's not an animal." His eyes softened, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'll be careful. Just stay here, okay?" And before I could stop him again, he was already walking toward the shed. I stood frozen on the porch, my legs locked in place. My breathing grew shallow as I watched him approach the structure. The wooden door creaked open, and for a moment, all I could hear was the distant rustle of the corn and the low buzz of summer insects. Then Derek's voice echoed out. "Emily, you need to see this." Against every instinct, I forced myself forward, following the worn path toward the shed. My heart thudded violently in my chest as I stepped through the open doorway. At first, I saw nothing but bags of feed, gardening tools, and neatly stacked crates. Then my eyes adjusted. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a row of barrels, stood the creature. It was a pig. Sort of. Its skin was pale pink, but the texture was wrong, almost too smooth, too stretched. Its face was even worse. The snout was shortened, revealing the faint outline of a nose far too human. Its ears were thin, curling oddly like malformed hands, and most horrifying of all, its eyes. Human. Wide, almond-shaped eyes set deep into the creature's face, blinking at us with slow, deliberate movements. They shimmered with moisture, reflecting the slivers of light that filtered through the cracks in the wood. It didn't move toward us. It simply stood there, staring. I stumbled back, my throat closing, bile rising fast. My vision blurred as a wave of nausea crashed over me. Derek's jaw tightened. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What the hell is that?" The creature let out another grunt, lower now, followed by a sharp clicking sound from its throat. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing flat, square teeth like a person's, arranged awkwardly within its jaws. "This isn't possible," Derek muttered, pulling me back toward the door. "We're leaving. Right now." We backed out of the shed slowly, never breaking eye contact with the thing. As soon as we stepped into the open air, we sprinted toward the house. My mind reeled. My legs threatened to buckle beneath me. "What was that?" I gasped as we slammed the door behind us. "What the hell was that, Derek?" He was pale now, his hands trembling slightly as he locked the door. "I don't know, but we're calling the police. They have to see this." I didn't argue. I couldn't. He pulled out his phone, dialing the sheriff's office. I could hear the faint ringing through the quiet room. "Sheriff's department?" came the voice on the other end. Derek spoke quickly. "This is Derek Miller. We're at Gerson Farm. There's something here. An animal. It's deformed. Something's wrong." Another pause followed, one that stretched longer than it should have. "We'll send a unit," the dispatcher said flatly. "Stay inside." The line went dead. Derek glanced at me, his brows furrowed. That was weird, right?" I nodded. "They know." He didn't respond. Minutes later, the sound of tires crunching gravel signaled the arrival of the patrol car. 2 officers stepped out, Sheriff Carlson and a younger deputy. Neither looked surprised. They asked to see the shed. We led them without a word. When the sheriff stepped inside, he didn't flinch. He simply turned to the deputy and muttered something I couldn't hear. A large black evidence bag was brought from the trunk. They worked swiftly, silently, as if collecting garbage rather than a twisted abomination. When they re-emerged, Sheriff Carlson gave us a thin, professional smile. Wild boars sometimes crossbreed. Strange mutations happen in rural areas. "That thing had human eyes," I snapped, my voice cracking. "That's not natural." The sheriff held up a hand calmly. "We'll have it tested, but for your safety, I recommend you both stay indoors tonight." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but the sheriff had already walked back to his cruiser. Moments later, they were gone, and once again, we were alone. The patrol car's taillights disappeared down the dirt road, swallowed by the trees. As their engine noise faded, an oppressive silence settled over the farm like a heavy fog. Neither of us spoke for a long while. I sat on the couch, knees drawn up to my chest, watching the front door like something might come crashing through it at any moment. Derek stood near the window, occasionally glancing out, his face tight, his fingers drumming anxiously against the wooden frame. "They didn't even look surprised," I finally whispered. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, they didn't, and that dispatcher, he didn't even ask any questions." Derek turned toward me, his voice low. "Emily, I don't think anyone's coming to help us." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "You think they're covering it up? I think they're part of it." The words settled like ice water in my veins. I wanted to argue, to believe this was all some bizarre coincidence, but the pieces no longer fit into anything resembling normal. There was no rational explanation for what we saw in that shed, or for the things I'd been hearing in the night. "Then we leave," I said firmly. "We pack everything and we leave now. Screw the contract, screw the Gersons." Derek nodded, but his eyes shifted toward the window again. "Yeah, first light. Safer that way." As if agreeing with him, the wind outside suddenly picked up, howling against the old farmhouse, making the walls groan like something breathing heavily around us. Night was coming, and with it the rules I hadn't fully understood until now. We spent the next few hours locking every door and window, stuffing towels under gaps, turning on every light we could find. Even the smallest darkened corner made my skin crawl. Derek kept a baseball bat nearby. I clutched the flashlight like a lifeline. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the entire house seemed to shrink. The air thickened. Every creak of the old wood felt like footsteps just out of sight. Around midnight, we sat on the couch together, too wired to sleep. I kept thinking of that grotesque thing in the shed, how its eyes followed us, its mouth parting slightly as if it wanted to speak. Derek squeezed my hand. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "it's been going on longer than we've been here. And the Gersons knew. They wrote the rules for a reason," I whispered back. "But not to protect us." The words hung there like poison. Suddenly, a soft clicking sound echoed from somewhere outside. Click, click, click. We both snapped our heads toward the window. The clicking continued, rhythmic and deliberate, not an animal, not the wind. Something mimicking the sound of movement or speech. "It's near the chicken coop," Derek whispered, peering through a crack in the curtains. "Stay here." "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Please don't go out there." He hesitated, jaw clenched, torn between instinct and protection, and then, as if the house itself decided for us, the sound stopped, replaced by a new one, knocking. 3 deliberate knocks. Not at the doors, not at the windows. This time, it came from directly above us, the attic. Neither of us moved. My breath hitched as I stared at the ceiling. The old beams groaned under some unseen weight. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't breathe. Finally, Derek stood, gripping the bat. "We can't ignore it anymore." "Yes, we can," I whispered fiercely. "That's exactly what we should do. Ignore it. Follow the damn rules." He shook his head. "The rules aren't working anymore." Before I could stop him, he crossed the room, pulling down the attic ladder with a loud creak. A musty, cold draft wafted down from the dark space above. "Stay down here," he ordered softly. I shook my head violently. I'm not staying down here alone. Against every instinct, I followed him up. The attic was cramped, filled with old boxes, broken furniture, and dusty crates stacked haphazardly beneath the sloped ceiling. The beam of my flashlight cut through the thick layers of dust, illuminating swirling motes like falling snow. Then we both froze. In the far corner sat a small child's rocking horse. It swayed gently back and forth, creaking under its own momentum. Neither of us had touched it. Behind it, barely visible against the back wall, was something else. A crude hole, much like the one I had seen in the armoire upstairs, only this one was larger, wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The hole led into darkness, a narrow tunnel disappearing into the framework of the house, like veins running beneath skin. Jesus, Derek muttered under his breath. The rocking horse continued to sway, the rhythmic creak filling the air like a twisted lullaby. Suddenly, from deep within the hole, we heard it again. Please, help me. The same voice from the cornfield, the same voice from the first night. But this time, there was something new layered beneath it. A second voice, broken and distorted, repeating the words imperfectly, as if learning to mimic them. Please, help me. The two voices overlapped in grotesque harmony, sending fresh waves of terror down my spine. Derek backed away, pulling me with him. We're done, he whispered. We are leaving, right now. As we descended the attic ladder, something heavy shifted behind us in the darkness. We didn't look back. We didn't sleep. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, whispering in short, panicked bursts, flinching at every creak of the old house. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long, thin fingers of light through the kitchen window when Derek finally spoke the words I'd been too afraid to say aloud. We have to talk to someone who knows more. I nodded. The sheriff clearly wasn't going to help us. The Gersons were gone, or worse, and the people who should have been protecting us were instead pretending nothing was wrong. But there was one person, a stranger, the man in the black suit, the one who somehow knew my name before I even opened my mouth. We left the house as soon as daylight felt strong enough to offer even a shred of protection. The car jolted as we sped down the uneven dirt road, tires kicking up dry dust clouds behind us. My stomach knotted tighter with every mile we put between ourselves and the farm. Do you think he'll even talk to us? Derek asked quietly. He already warned me once, I replied. I think he knows exactly what's going on. Elder Hollow was small, only a few blocks of aging storefronts, a single gas station, and a cafe with faded signage. If the man was still in town, this was where he'd be. And we spotted him before we even parked, sitting alone at a corner booth inside the Hollow Bean Cafe, his tall frame unnervingly still, sipping black coffee as though he had been waiting for us. As we entered, his pale eyes lifted beneath the brim of his hat, locking onto mine. Ms. Hargrove, he greeted calmly. And you must be Derek. Derek stiffened beside me. Sit, the man said softly, motioning to the booth opposite him. We slid into the booth cautiously, the vinyl seat cold against my legs. How do you know our names? Derek demanded, his voice sharp. The man smiled faintly, as if amused. Names are easy when you know who to look for. You're not the first. The words made my blood run cold. You've done this before? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, folding his hands neatly on the table. I've seen what the Gersons do, what they've always done. And you? He fixed his gaze on me. Just happened to be next in line. I swallowed, my throat dry. What are they? What is this place? The man exhaled slowly, as though he were choosing his words with care. The Gerson family bought that land 20 years ago, he began. But the land wasn't empty. It belonged to a woman, an old widow who had lived there her entire life. She didn't want to sell, but the Gersons were persistent. They tricked her, forged papers, took everything. He paused, his voice lowered. Before she was forced off her land, she cursed it. And the Gersons? Well, they didn't believe in curses. Derek leaned forward. And the animals? The voices? The scarecrows? The man nodded. Manifestations of the curse. The land feeds on people, twists them, takes something from them. Some become livestock. Others, he looked directly at me, become part of the fields. My stomach flipped. I could hardly breathe. I heard a child, I whispered. In the cornfield, is that? The man's eyes softened. That voice belonged to my grandson. I froze. Derek's jaw clenched. My daughter took a job at the farm after she lost everything, he continued bitterly. Single mother, desperate. Just like so many others, the Gersons lure there. His voice wavered briefly but steadied again. Neither of them ever came home, but I've seen them since. changed, bound to that place. A heavy silence settled between us. I fought the burning sting of tears. "Why doesn't anyone stop them?" Derek asked, his voice tight with anger. The man offered a humorless smile. "Because the Gersons control more than just that farm. They control the town, the sheriff, the council, even parts of the state. This isn't just some backwoods horror story. This is business. And anyone who tries to expose it disappears." The full weight of his words crashed over me like a tidal wave. My entire body trembled. "And the rules?" I managed to whisper. "The rules are designed to prolong your stay, to keep the curse contained, for now." His voice grew darker. "As long as someone follows the rules, the land doesn't get too hungry. But eventually, someone always breaks them." I felt like vomiting. "How do we stop it?" Derek asked. The man studied us carefully. "There may be a way, but it's dangerous, risky. If we fail, you'll end up just like the others." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small cloth pouch tied with black string, and set it gently on the table. "This," he said quietly, "was given to me by someone who escaped the curse long ago, an artifact from the widow herself. With the right ritual, it may allow us to reclaim one soul, maybe two, but not everyone." I stared at the pouch like it might explode. "You mean we can save someone?" I asked. He nodded solemnly. "But there's always a price. Someone must take their place." The words landed with brutal finality. Derek squeezed my hand under the table, his skin cold and clammy. "We'll do it," I said before even thinking. Derek looked at me, startled, but I held his gaze. "We'll do whatever it takes." The man nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. "Good," he whispered. "Then we begin tomorrow at dawn." The drive back to the farm felt heavier this time. Every mile that brought us closer pulled tighter at my chest, like invisible hands wrapping around my ribs. The man sat silently in the back seat, staring straight ahead as the fields drew into view once more. The tall stalks of corn swayed under the afternoon breeze, hiding their secrets in plain sight. The sunflowers stood like soldiers, their wide faces following the descending sun. Except one. Near the southern edge of the field, I spotted it immediately. One lone sunflower, bent, twisted toward the farmhouse, its black center staring directly at us like a watching eye. "They're already stirring," the man said softly from behind us. "The land knows what we're planning." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to steady my breathing. As we pulled up to the house, Derek immediately stepped out and began checking every lock, every window, making sure nothing had shifted since we left. The man, Howard, he finally introduced himself on the drive, stepped onto the porch, scanning the perimeter like a hunter reading invisible tracks. "The ritual has to happen at first light," Howard said, "before the sun fully rises." "Why then?" Derek asked, his voice strained. "Because that's when their hold is weakest," Howard replied, "before the fields wake completely." I followed Howard into the house while Derek continued his patrol. The air inside felt stale, thick with a tension I could almost chew. The shadows clung longer than they should, even in the early evening light. Howard pulled a few items from his coat and laid them out on the dining table. Small, brittle leaves, blackened at the edges. Bone fragments no larger than my thumb, polished smooth from handling, and a tiny glass vial filled with something dark, like congealed ink. "These belonged to her," he whispered. "The widow who cursed this place." The mere presence of the items made my skin crawl. I've studied the old rites for years. Some fragments from her journals survived, hidden in church records long before the Gersons controlled everything. This ritual, it's not a true reversal. He paused. It's more of a trade. Derek came inside, wiping sweat from his brow. "Trade?" he repeated grimly. "One soul out, another in," Howard said plainly. "That's the only way to break a binding this old." I felt the room tilt slightly. "So, if we bring someone back, someone else takes their place," he finished, his voice heavy. That's how the curse sustains itself. My stomach churned. The stakes sat there on the table between us, grotesque in their simplicity. Can't we just stop the whole thing? Derek asked. Destroy whatever's feeding it? Howard's eyes darkened. It's too embedded. The land has been fed for decades now, rooted in blood, pain, and broken promises. All we can do is save who we can. I swallowed hard. Who will we be bringing back? Howard's voice softened. My daughter and grandson. If the ritual works, they'll be released from the field. I exchanged a glance with Derek. He knew what I was thinking. Even if we succeeded, none of this would truly end. Someone else, maybe even us, would be taken instead. But what choice did we have? Night descended quickly, the farmhouse growing colder as the wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows in short, sharp bursts. The house felt like a coffin now, creaking and groaning under unseen weight. We sat together in the dim glow of lantern light, waiting. Somewhere beyond the walls, faint sounds echoed through the fields, not voices this time, but the shuffle of dry leaves, the occasional crack of breaking stalks. They're watching, Howard whispered. I tightened my grip on Derek's hand, my skin clammy. Around midnight, the house began to groan louder. Floorboards shifted as though under invisible feet. The familiar knocks returned. 3, precise, unrelenting. Not from the doors, not from the windows. From inside the walls again. We said nothing. We didn't move. Just before dawn, Howard stood. It's time. We followed him out into the open field. The sky had begun its slow shift into pale gray, bleeding weak light over the horizon. The fields of sunflowers loomed on one side, the dense wall of corn on the other. The air was deathly still. At the edge of the cornfield, hidden behind a cluster of large stones, lay an ancient circle, stones blackened with age, partially buried beneath wild grass and soil. This is where she made the binding, Howard whispered, reverently stepping into the circle. Stay inside once we begin. Don't leave it for any reason. Derek and I nodded, our feet crunching softly against the brittle earth as we joined him. Howard set the objects at each corner of the circle, murmuring words in a language I didn't recognize. Something old, something not meant for modern ears. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, cutting through my jacket and slicing into my skin like thin blades. The chant deepened, rising into a low hum that vibrated through the ground beneath us. My teeth rattled inside my skull. The pressure in the air built like a storm, tightening its grip. And then, as Howard lifted the small glass vial, a scream tore across the fields. High-pitched, human. A child's scream. Help me! My breath caught. It was the same voice I'd heard since my first night here. The scream twisted, warping into something deeper, unnatural, as if the land itself resisted being challenged. Howard didn't flinch. He poured the black liquid into the soil. The ground trembled. Thin tendrils of black mist slithered up from the cracks between the stones, swirling around us like curious snakes. From within the cornfield, I saw movement. Shadows pacing just beyond the stalks. Figures I couldn't fully see but could feel. And then, from the opposite side of the circle, 2 figures stepped into view. A woman, tall and thin, her face pale and exhausted but unmistakably human. Beside her, clutching her hand, was a small boy. They looked straight at Howard. Tears streamed down his face. "Maddie," he whispered. But as they stepped closer, the mist thickened, swirling violently. The boy looked up, his small hand tightening around his mother's fingers. Howard's chant rose one final time, his voice cracking as the wind howled. The mist snapped back down into the earth like a great invisible hand yanking it away. The woman and child stood before us now, real, whole. It worked. For a breathless moment, none of us spoke, and then the sky shifted, the first beam of true morning light piercing the horizon. Howard exhaled shakily. It's done, but I knew, deep inside, that nothing was truly over. Not yet. The sun rose higher, washing the fields in pale gold as though nothing had happened. The farmhouse stood in the distance, still and silent, like an old photograph trapped in time. Howard held his daughter and grandson tightly, his face buried in their hair. The boy clung to him, his thin arms trembling, while Mattie, her face pale and gaunt, stood in shock, as if uncertain whether any of this was real. Derek and I watched, too stunned to speak. The impossible had happened. And yet, deep inside me, something gnawed at my ribs, a silent alarm that refused to quiet, because the ritual wasn't free, because someone still had to pay. Howard finally pulled back, his voice cracking. "You're safe now," he whispered to his daughter. "You're home." Maddie's voice was faint, brittle. I thought I was dreaming. Every day. It felt like it would never end." The boy nestled his face into his mother's coat, too small to understand the depth of what they had escaped. Derek placed a hand gently on my back, leaning closer. "We need to go, before the land notices." Howard heard him. He looked at me, his expression suddenly grim, as though the weight of what came next had finally returned to him. "We need to move fast," Howard said. "We've bought time, but not forever. The land will awaken fully soon." He glanced at the horizon nervously. I looked out across the swaying sunflowers. The wind shifted unnaturally now, blowing in short, sharp gusts that moved only portions of the field. Some flowers bent, others stood stiff, as though the ground itself was breathing. Something was stirring beneath. We hurried back toward the farmhouse, Maddie weak on her feet, Howard holding her up while Derek carried the boy. As we approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the edge of the porch, just beneath the steps, 3 fresh drag marks in the dirt, wide, deep, as though something heavy had been pulled across the ground overnight. My stomach twisted. I grabbed Derek's arm, pointing silently. His face paled. "They're reclaiming what we took," Howard whispered behind me, his voice hollow. "The land doesn't like being denied." We ushered everyone into the house, slamming the door shut, bolting every lock we could find. The house moaned around us, as though alive, annoyed by our presence. The air grew heavier, thicker, as though something unseen pressed down upon the roof, creeping through the beams and walls like water seeking crack. Derek and I pulled the curtain shut while Howard sat Maddie and his grandson near the fireplace, speaking softly to calm them. The boy suddenly turned to me, his voice a quiet tremor. "There were others," he whispered. I crouched beside him. "Others?" He nodded, eyes wide, in the corn. They couldn't talk right. They made noises, like they forgot how words worked. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounded in my ears. "And the scarecrows," he added, his voice dropping to a fearful whisper. "They weren't always scarecrows." Howard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The weight of it hit me like ice water. The bipedal shapes I had seen in the field, still and stiff. I had thought they were props, decorations, but the truth was far worse. They had once been people, victims, like Maddie, like her son, like us. A loud crack echoed through the house. The wood above us groaned sharply, followed by a dull scraping sound that dragged across the roof like heavy branches. Or claws. Derek grabbed the baseball bat again, his knuckles turning white. "We won't make it until morning, will we?" Howard shook his head grimly. "The land knows someone cheated it. It's trying to balance the debt." "But we performed the ritual," I said desperately. "We paid the price." "You shifted the debt," Howard corrected. "But you haven't erased it. That's the truth about this place. The debt always moves forward. It never ends, only changes hands." His eyes met mine, filled with a painful understanding. That was why the Gersons hired outsiders. That was why the rules existed. Keep the farm running, keep the land barely satisfied. Let strangers shoulder the weight of the curse. And now, we had disrupted the cycle. Something sharp struck the front door. A hard, deliberate thud that made everyone freeze. Thud, thud, thud. We held our breath, eyes wide as the knocks reverberated through the house. "Stay away from the windows," Howard whispered. The knocking stopped. only for a moment. Then it moved. To the back door. Thud, thud, thud. They were circling the house. The boy whimpered softly. Maddie pulled him closer, tears slipping down her pale cheek. Suddenly, all the lights flickered, the old bulbs buzzing with sharp electric snaps before plunging us into darkness. "No, no," I gasped. The house groaned louder, the very foundation vibrating beneath us. The wooden floorboards pulsed like a heartbeat. From the walls, faint voices began to whisper. Not clear, but overlapping layers of broken phrases, disjointed echoes, half-sentences. "Help me, it's cold. Where am I? Don't take me." The voices of those still trapped. Howard's face turned gray. They're reaching through the binding. It's unraveling. A sharp bang erupted from upstairs, then another, then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving across the second floor. I clutched Derek's arm tightly, unable to speak. "The attic," he mouthed silently. Howard stood up suddenly. "If we stay here, we're only delaying it. The house won't protect us anymore." "Then what do we do?" I whispered. He paused, his face hardening. "We run." Howard led the way, moving swiftly toward the back door while we gathered Maddie and the boy. The house shook again as another sharp bang rattled the walls. The thing on the second floor moved faster now, heavy footfalls that echoed directly above us. Derek pulled open the back door. The wind screamed instantly, cold and violent, pushing against us like an invisible hand trying to force us back inside. The fields danced wildly under the moonlight, their tall stalks bending unnaturally in waves that rolled like breath. The cornfield to the left swayed too much, too fast. Many things were moving inside it. We bolted from the house into the open yard, the cold slicing through our skin like thin blades. The boy whimpered, his cries lost beneath the howling wind. "Stay together," Howard shouted over the roar. We sprinted toward the dirt road, but the land fought us with every step. The ground felt unsteady, as if the soil itself shifted beneath our feet, resisting our escape. Behind us, the house groaned one final time, and then glass shattered upstairs. I made the mistake of looking back. In the attic window, something pressed against the shattered glass. A figure, too thin, arms too long, head tilting unnaturally as it watched us flee. It wasn't one of the scarecrows, not yet, but it was something caught halfway. I snapped my head forward, forcing my legs to push faster. The dirt road came into view, but the field on either side closed in tighter. The corn whispered horribly in the wind, the stalks bending toward us like skeletal arms. Suddenly, Derek froze. "Shit!" he cursed, skidding to a stop. The old black sedan, parked sideways across the road, blocking our exit, the same car Howard had arrived in, only now its doors hung open, interior lights flickering weakly. Its tires were flat, slashed open by something not entirely human. The path was blocked. "No, no!" I gasped, chest heaving. "We can still make it," Howard said urgently, scanning the tree line ahead. "There's a maintenance trail through the woods. If we reach the old church, we can..." A loud crack snapped through the air. From the cornfield's edge, figures stepped into the moonlight. 6 of them, twisted, crooked. Their silhouettes resembled human forms, but not fully. Their heads drooped forward like the scarecrows, but their legs shuffled unevenly, as if unused to walking. Long, thin arms dragged at their sides. Their faces, oh God, their faces, patchwork flesh pulled taut around hollow features. Some still had remnants of mouths. Others displayed stitched burlap covering where eyes should have been, as if the land couldn't quite finish the transformation. Derek instinctively raised the bat, his breathing harsh. "Get behind me," Howard held up a trembling hand. "Don't engage. If you provoke them, they'll all come." We backed up slowly, the creatures advancing in broken synchronization, like puppets operated by an impatient hand. Suddenly, the boy slipped on a loose patch of gravel, falling hard onto his knees. His scream pierced the night. The nearest figure twitched. Then they all accelerated. "Run!" Howard bellowed. We sprinted toward the woods as the creatures gave chase, their limbs jerking wildly with unnatural speed. Branches lashed at my face as we crashed into the tree line. The dense canopy above blotted out the moonlight, throwing us into near darkness. The air grew heavier, filled with the stench of wet earth and something rotten. Behind us, the crackling of leaves and snapping of branches grew louder. "Faster!" Derek shouted, pulling the boy along while Maddie stumbled behind him. Ahead, the faint silhouette of an old steeple appeared, the abandoned church Howard spoke of. Its rotting frame leaned precariously under the weight of decades of neglect, but at this moment, it was salvation. We crashed through the broken doors, slamming them behind us. Inside, the church was cold, hollow, and filled with the faint scent of mildew and dust. The wooden pews had long since collapsed into splinters. Broken stained glass lay scattered across the warped floorboards. Howard locked the doors as best he could, shoving a heavy beam against the handles. The pounding started immediately. The creatures outside slammed against the door, their fists striking in perfect, horrifying rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. The entire structure shuddered with each impact. I collapsed against one of the pews, my breath ragged. "How long will the doors hold?" Howard didn't answer at first. He was staring at the altar. I followed his gaze. Behind the altar, faintly illuminated by the moonlight filtering through a shattered window, was an old mural, a twisted depiction of the farm, the fields, the house, the scarecrows. But the center of the mural was worse. A massive black sun hung above the land, and beneath it, dozens of thin, faceless human shapes knelt before the Gerson family crest. I felt my stomach churn. Maddie gasped softly behind me. "The church was built after the widow was driven out," Howard said, his voice hollow. "The Gersons wanted to sanctify the land, but all they did was feed it more blood." The pounding grew louder. The door wouldn't hold forever. Derek looked around wildly. "Is there another way out?" Howard hesitated, then pointed to a trap door near the altar, the root cellar. We rushed toward it as the wooden doors behind us groaned under the weight of the attackers. Howard and Derek pried open the hatch. A narrow wooden staircase led into a pitch-black abyss below. The boy hesitated, but Maddie scooped him up, her voice shaking. "We don't have a choice." One by one, we slipped into the darkness as the doors behind us finally splintered open. The last thing I saw before Howard closed the hatch was one of the scarecrow things stumbling into the church, its head snapping toward us. Sensing where we had gone, the hatch slammed shut, sealing us into the cold dark. And we kept descending. The air inside the root cellar was suffocating, thick, stale, damp. Each step downward creaked under our weight, the narrow wooden stairs threatening to collapse with every footfall. Howard led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the pitch black like a blade. The flickering cone of light revealed stone walls slick with moisture, ancient roots twisting through cracks like fingers trying to claw their way inside. The deeper we went, the colder it grew. The wooden stairs ended at a packed dirt floor. The space beneath the church was larger than I expected. An underground chamber not meant for storage, but for something far older. Rituals. The walls were etched with symbols, strange markings, circles layered within circles, painted with faded red pigment that looked uncomfortably close to dried blood. Bones, small and large, were embedded into the dirt along the edges of the chamber, as if the ground itself had been fed. Howard whispered almost reverently, "This wasn't built by the church. This was here long before the Gersons took over." Maddie clutched her son closer, her wide eyes reflecting the weak flashlight beam. The boy whimpered quietly into her chest, but she hushed him, trying to remain strong. Derek scanned the chamber, his voice tight. "How far underground are we?" Howard didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt at the far end of the room, where the floor dipped into a shallow pit lined with cracked stones. "This is where they made the first offering," Howard said quietly. "This is where the bargain began." Another loud crash echoed from above, the heavy thud of bodies slamming against the hatch. "They're coming," Maddie whispered. I felt the weight of it too, like the earth above was being peeled back, inch by inch. Howard stood, his face pale but steady. "We have one last chance." He reached into his coat and pulled out the cloth pouch, the same one he'd used to free Maddie and the boy. It seems we're frayed now, as though the first ritual had drained most of its power. "This circle allows for one more trade," he said grimly. "A final exchange, but we must choose carefully." The weight of those words hung heavy in the dank air. I swallowed hard. "Choose?" Howard nodded. "The land took its debt back once, but if we offer it a willing sacrifice, one final trade, it may release its hold entirely, at least on your family." Maddie's face twisted in horror. "No, no more trades." "There's no other way," Howard said. "It's either a choice or the land takes who it wants." Above us, the sounds grew louder. The scratching, scraping, and hammering against the hatch had become rhythmic again. 3 deliberate knocks, over and over. The same knock I'd heard since my first night at the farm. Thud, thud, thud. Derek's voice trembled. "We're not giving anyone to that thing." Howard looked at us, his face haunted. "It doesn't have to be one of you. I came here for my daughter and grandson. Their debt was mine to begin with." "No!" Maddie gasped. "Dad?" Howard held up a hand. "Listen to me. This curse only grows because no one faces it. The Gersons fed it strangers. I was too weak to stop it years ago, but I won't let it take anyone else." His voice shook, but his resolve didn't waver. "The land must be fed one last time," he said quietly, "and this time it will take me." I couldn't breathe. The hatch above groaned sharply as something heavy landed directly on top of it. The wood cracked loudly. "There's no time," Howard continued, pressing the pouch into my hand. "You have to finish the ritual." "But I don't know how," my voice cracked. "You've seen enough," he whispered. "The land knows you now. Speak the words. Pour the offering into the pit. And when it takes me," Maddie sobbed, clinging to her father, but he gently pried himself free. "You have to go," he whispered, kissing his grandson's forehead. The hatch above splintered again. Long, thin fingers pushed through the cracks now, searching blindly, like pale roots breaking through the ceiling. Derek grabbed my arm. "Emily, now." I forced my legs to move, stumbling toward the pit with the pouch clutched tight in my shaking hands. The ground beneath us trembled as Howard stepped into the center of the stone circle. His face was calm, his eyes closed. I untied the pouch. Inside were the last fragments, the dried leaves, the slivers of bone, and the thick black dust that seemed to pulse faintly under my touch. My fingers trembled as I emptied the pouch into the pit. Howard began chanting. The air thickened instantly, the walls vibrating with a low hum that crawled through my teeth and filled my skull. The hatch above gave one final screech, and then it burst open. They dropped into the chamber like rag dolls, the scarecrow things, 6 of them, crawling unnaturally on all fours before jerking upright, their heads snapping toward us in sickening unison. Their stitched faces twitched under invisible strings, heads cocked unnaturally as if listening to the ritual. One of them stepped forward, reaching toward me. Then Howard shouted the final words, his voice breaking into a scream. The ground erupted. Thick roots shot upward from the pit, twisting around Howard's body in seconds, wrapping his limbs tightly, as if pulling him into the earth's throat. He didn't fight. As the roots swallowed him, the creatures froze. Their bodies twitched violently. One by one, they collapsed, limbs folding, heads dropping as though their strings had been cut. The earth pulsed once beneath us. The air lightened, and then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Derek grabbed my hand. "We have to go." I stared at the empty pit. Only Howard's hat remained on the dirt, resting gently where he had stood. I wiped my tears, scooped up the boy, and together we ran toward the narrow back tunnel that had opened as the ground shifted, leading away from the nightmare behind us. The narrow tunnel beyond the ritual chamber was colder, damper, the walls pressing close around us as we stumbled forward through the darkness. The only light came from Derek's flashlight, flickering weakly as the batteries threatened to die. Each breath echoed off the stone, shallow and ragged. My arms ached from carrying the boy, but I clung to him as though letting go would mean losing him to the land again. Behind us, the silence was heavy. No more scratching. No more banging. The monstrous figures hadn't followed. Howard's sacrifice had worked. At least, that's what I tried to believe. We moved deeper into the tunnel, following a faint draft that hinted at an exit ahead. The walls widened slowly, forming a crude staircase cut into the earth itself. Faint slivers of moonlight peeked from above as we approached what looked like a crumbling stone door, partially buried under roots. Derek forced it open with his shoulder, grunting as old vines snapped away. Cool night air rushed in. We emerged at the edge of the forest, several hundred yards from the church. The farmhouse sat in the distance, a dark silhouette under the thin moon, the cornfields eerily still around it. For the first time in days, the air felt different. Not safe. Never safe. But lighter. Maddie collapsed onto her knees beside me, tears streaking her dirt-covered face as she clutched her son. Derek wrapped his arms around both of us, his breath hot against my temple. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The sun's earliest rays slowly bled across the horizon, turning the sky a pale violet as dawn crept forward. The farm remained still. No more twisted shapes lurking at the edge of the fields. No more scarecrows standing unnaturally rigid. They were gone. The land was silent. We never went back inside the farmhouse. We left that morning, driving in numb silence down the dirt road, past the old town, past the crooked wooden signs marking Elder Hollow's borders. The shadows of the trees grew shorter as the sun rose fully behind us. Maddie sat in the back seat, her son asleep against her chest, his tiny hands gripping her jacket. She stared out the window blankly, as if unsure whether any of this was truly over. It wasn't. Not really. We crossed county lines, driving for hours before Derek finally pulled off at a small roadside diner, a dusty relic off the highway where the world felt normal again. As we sat inside, sipping weak coffee, Derek finally broke the silence. His voice was thin, hollow. "Do you think it's really done?" I stared down at my cup, watching the ripples tremble beneath my shaking hands. "The farm isn't done. It's never done." Maddie looked up from her son, her voice hoarse. "But you said," Howard said. I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Howard bought you time. He saved you both. But that place? It's still there. And someday someone else will answer a job ad, someone who's desperate, just like we were." Derek's jaw clenched. "The Gersons will send their contracts again. The sheriff will still turn his head. That town will pretend nothing ever happened," I whispered. Maddie's hands tightened around her son. "Then why save us?" My throat thickened. "Because Howard refused to let you become part of it. That's all he could do." We sat in silence again, broken only by the faint clink of utensils from the few scattered customers around us, blissfully unaware of what lay buried a few hours north. Finally, Derek leaned forward, voice low. "We have to tell someone. The police. The press. Somebody." I shook my head slowly. "And say what? That there's a cursed farm feeding on people? That the missing have become livestock and scarecrows?" "They'll think we're insane," Maddie whispered. "Or worse," I added. "They'll bury it. Just like they always have." Derek's face hardened. "We can't just walk away." I reached into my bag and pulled out Howard's journal, the one we'd recovered from the church cellar. Faded leather, brittle pages, his notes documenting everything. The rituals, the victims, the history of the land. "This is all we have," I said. "It's not enough to stop them, but maybe one day it will be." Derek exhaled slowly, defeated. Maddie gently rocked her son, whispering into his ear as he stirred. I tucked the journal away carefully. My hands trembled as I zipped the bag closed. We left the diner as the morning traffic picked up. Trucks rumbled down the interstate, carrying their goods to towns that had never heard of Elder Hollow. Families sat at breakfast counters, chatting about ordinary lives, untouched by the nightmare we'd crawled out of. As we merged back onto the highway, Derek's hand found mine, gripping tightly. "We're free," he said softly. "No," I whispered, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We're lucky." Weeks passed. We settled into a small apartment on the other side of the state. Maddie and her son stayed with us for a time, slowly rebuilding whatever fragile sense of normalcy they could manage. But I still dreamt of it. The fields, the house, the voices from the walls. The worst dreams came at 3:33 a.m. Always 3:33. I would wake to the faint echo of knocks. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Just like before. Sometimes I'd check the front door, heart pounding. There would be nothing there, but I never truly believed the nightmare was gone. And then, one morning, a small envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, an employment offer from Gerson Agricultural Holdings. Signed at the bottom was the name of a woman I'd never heard before, a new recruiter. Same job, same promises, same salary. And at the bottom, beneath the elegant signature, the words, "Caretaker position available immediately, housing provided." I felt my breath leave my body as I held the paper in shaking hands. The land was hungry again, and somewhere, someone else was about to answer the call. Thank you for staying with us through this chilling journey into the Gerson farm, the last trade. Behind every horror story lies a shadow of truth, a reminder that some doors are best left unopened and some debts never truly disappear. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another dark story from our channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the forgotten corners of horror where few dare to tread. And remember, when you see the job offer that seems too good to be true, ask yourself, what is the land really offering you? Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and stay far away from Elder Hollow.